And we are live. Welcome, welcome, welcome to everyone, whether you are showing up for the live stream or if you are watching the replay. Today, I have the privilege of interviewing Selina Rifkin, who is author of How to Train Your Cat, Good Life Nutrition, The Young Woman's Good Life, Road to Antares, Child of the Lost, The River's Edge, Hera's Heir, The Sorceress Unbound, and her latest, The Storytellers, which we will be discussing today. So, Selena, I just want to jump right in. And for those of you who haven't had a chance to chat with you like I have, just to begin with, please share how long you've been writing and what inspired you to take that creative journey.
I started, and thank you for inviting me today. This is very fun. I started writing, oh, 30, 40 years ago, something like that. And then life happened and I stopped
Hmm.
for 30 years. I stopped writing for 30 years. And
Oh.
then just before COVID happened, um, the gods were poking me. The gods were poking me and said, "You need to get back to this." And I was like, "Oh, okay." And so I had a novel in my head. And so I started looking in how to do that. And then I started writing. And then it's like, oh, 2 weeks to lockdown. Oh, that'll be 2 whole weeks to write. How delightful. Yeah, well, three epic length novels
Yeah.
later, we all know what happened. So
Hmm.
writing is, I write fiction and I write nonfiction. And I am so happy when I'm writing.
I love how it was the gods, like you said, giving the poke of you're going to do this, you're going to do this. We're not going to stop nagging. I think people outside of our faith don't realize just how present those little pokes can really be.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So, is there something about Greek myths in particular that capture your imagination?
I I had this wonderful book as a child, which is actually lurking around in my bookshelves behind me, called the Big Golden Book of Greek Mythology, and I loved
Hmm.
that. Now, I did read a lot of biblical stories as well, because my babysitter was a Mennonite, and let me tell you, that stuff was stuffed into my head. It wasn't a bad thing; they were good storytellers, and but I liked the biblical stories, but I liked the Greek mythology just as much. And
Hmm.
it's never let go. It's just kind of been in my head. And when I started adjusting my practice towards Neoplatonism,
Hmm.
and I started working with the Greek gods more particularly, and they have just been right there for me. And it's been a hell of a journey. So
Yeah, it always is with these things, especially once you start getting pulled into where your niche is, where you're going to belong spiritually. So, regarding the storytellers, was there anything in particular that motivated you to tell this exact story? Was there something that you wanted to say, something that you looked at the broader world of just, okay, you know, there needs to be a discussion about this, people's minds needs to be open, just what was behind all that?
there was, so I read a lot, as many pagans do. I came across a researcher named Jonathan Haidt,
Hmm.
Haidt, and he works with the the biology behind our moral decisions, which has slowly
Hmm.
been becoming a field in about the last 20 years or so. And what he came up with was six different, he calls them moral matrices, and they have to do with what we are biologically evolved to to how we're biologically evolved to react to things. These are survival traits, if you will. Like, for example, care. You know,
Hmm.
our need to care about each other. It comes from a woman's need to care for her infant, because if we don't care for babies, they die. Um,
Hmm.
and so there's a very strong that's where that drive comes from. And we have a number of these different drives, including hierarchy, for example, and which is, he calls that, I believe he calls that matrix, authority subversion. So on one side you
Hmm.
have, authority, and what do you consider legitimate authority, and then what does it look like when you need to subvert that authority, because sometimes authority gets overwhelming. So he's studying from a he's studying, he's like traveled around the world doing these different studies, and he's found that these different aspects cross human cultures. So my thought about it was he's gone into the political with it. He wrote a book called oh shoot, it'll come back to me. I can't remember right now.
Put a pin in it.
Yeah, we'll put a pin in it, and it'll come back. But anyway, you look him up, you'll find the book, because he hasn't written that many books. He's only written about 3. And so in looking at these pieces and in looking at some of the political aspects of it, there's one side of the aisle that tends to pretty much look at all of these matrices and handle them pretty equally, which is what we're supposed to be doing as humans. And on the other side of the aisle, couple of these matrices are focused on completely to the detriment of all the others. So it's kind of unbalanced. Right. And some of my purpose was to try and explain what these other matrices were and why they were important, and how we understand things is through story. Our brains are built around story. And oh, look, I write fiction. So one of the things about the myths, because in the book I started with choosing myths that I might be able to use to illustrate these and model these ideas of his. And it didn't go completely the way I planned, because that's how these things work.
That's writing. And the muses have their own opinions, and sometimes you feel that as well.
Yes, and a good deal of this was, I would have to call it channeled, because I would say, I don't know what to do, and I'd say, could you please send me the right story? And so put that. It usually happens around 3 a.m. or maybe 5 a.m. It kind of depends, but that seems to be the magic hour. And so some variation on these stories would drop into my head. The other thing is that the voice in mythology, and generally in mythology, is remote when compared to modern writing. We expect when we read a novel that we are going to be in the person's head to some degree or another, so that we understand what their motivation is. Psychology wasn't a thing in the ancient world. We had each other, and we just talked to each other all the time. Psychology started to evolve as a thing when we started to, have enough wealth that we could have a room by ourselves and stick our noses in a book and read for a while. So, that self-reflection, I don't think that was much of a thing. And so you tended to get the voice that you got was this, we call it the omniscient voice. So it's like you're in everybody's head all at the same time. So what I wanted to do is I wanted to take that mythology and retain some of that, overview, but also from a writing standpoint, make it more palatable for a modern reader. Which that's less my writing group, because they were fantastic with that, and some of these had multiple rewrites.
Yeah, one of the things that really struck me is because usually when I read novels, I do feel like I'm more so an outsider. I'm the fly on the wall, and I'm very nosily sticking my head into the character's business. It's a rare character that I really feel like I'm a companion on their journey. But for Hannah, I feel like something about the way you wrote her, she just invited me in, and so that was a very different experience for me as a reader. And also in the book, I noticed that you did a really good job finding subtle ways to kind of slip explanations of events and motivations of the ancient stories that I think would be kind of puzzling to modern readers, especially those who aren't of the pagan world and haven't done the research, haven't gotten some cultural context for all of this stuff. So has it been challenging you to essentially, I suppose, translate would be the best word, those ancient concepts and motivations, and to give them context that modern readers can understand and digest? And to what degree has your own spiritual understanding really informed the way you approach that aspect of the writing?
Oh yeah, and that's been a very interesting journey. That piece has been very, because some of it is, it's like for example, the story of Pandora. I always was like, why did hope stay in the box? Never made any sense to me. Hope is supposed to be a good thing. And, so, it's like I got to address that, from a cultural standpoint. And it was, and yet it was very valuable because it's perspective on how far we've come as a culture. And our culture is based on theirs and what was important to them. And, so many of our basic ideas came from Athens, and,
Hmm.
free
That they
speech,
did.
like that was where that came from, was Athens. And, it frustrates me when I'm looking at modern education, because we are taught that philosophy is this just, it's like this separate category all by itself. And somewhere along the line, I realized that's like Plato and Aristotle. These people were not atheists. They had their
No,
gods.
they were not. Hmm.
And what they had to say is like, to try and isolate it from their religious expression. It's not working for me. And it seems
Yeah.
impolite, to put it
Yeah,
kindly. But,
it
and the
does
other,
seem like a disservice to them, especially since, I mean, these are the fathers of Western civilization. We'll just ignore what our Abrahamic brethren have to say on that. That's a topic for another time. But I mean, you look past a lot of the little lies people tell themselves, and you look at the origins of where so much of where it came from. Our debt to Greece. I mean, it's very difficult to overstate.
yeah, yeah, it is. And it's interesting. One of the people I listen to, and in fact, um, your watchers may or may not be familiar with Jordan Peterson, but he is, let's just say that he is in the realm of leading some of the Christian revival that's happening. One of the things he's been doing is he's been taking the biblical corpus and interpreting it. The term is hermeneutics, and he's been engaging with the text in a way that is relevant to modern psychology. And some of his work really inspired me to, do what I'm doing, because he had also done that with the ancient myths before he started doing this with just working strictly with the Bible. He's got a book coming out next
Hmm.
month. But even he's traveling the world right now, and he absolutely acknowledges that a great deal of our civilization came from Greek
Hmm.
philosophy and Greek notions of what mattered. And I really think that if an idea is good, that a single religion can't really claim it. It's like, I think
Yeah.
the gods send us this information, and it's like, and it comes in, and we start to use it, and if it's good, those of us who have used it thrive, and those that decide not to, they're not going to do as well. Now, in the short term versus, this is long term versus short term.
Right.
I'm looking at it, I'm aiming to look at things in the big picture kind of way. um, but there's these ideas that have just been around. Like, for example, Christianity likes to take credit for the removal of slavery. Like, oh, Christianity ended slavery. Well, you know, England made a stand for that.
Hmm.
And so and that's awesome. And kudos to them for doing that. They could also afford to
Hmm.
do so. Slavery was a labor
Yeah.
problem. And the idea of getting rid of slavery went back to the Stoics. Um, and yes, I have documentation on that. I paid a lot of money for an academic piece of work that studied the origins of where people not having slaves came from. So it's not it's not a unique idea in this place. So I like to
I
trace
love it.
where ideas come from.
Yeah, and credit where credit is due. And I think there's a lot of what you say that if an idea is good, meaning, it actually works for people living on Earth and doing so successfully, there's something about it to where even if they're like, okay, I didn't know that came from my God, but I'm going to curly cue a way to make it okay just because it works. I think there's a kind of a streak of pragmatism that
Yes,
does exist within
which is
human
what
nature.
humans do.
But let's
And
get
then
a
we tell the
little bit
story
right.
about it.
Let's get a little bit more into your book. Your main character is named Hannah, and during the course of her journey, she's treated to the tales of. You're going to have to pronounce any little missteps of my pronunciation, but Prince Bellerophon, Demeter and Persephone, Metis, the Minotaur, Arachne, and Pandora's box. So, without giving too much away, how did you hone in on those specific tales?
Oh, um, that one's hard because a lot of it was just pure. I mean, I've read a lot of, read a lot of them. I did my best to, some of them I went back and read in the original, like, uh, yep, brain fart. Sorry. Um,
Okay,
I'm thinking Homer,
it's
but not Homer. So, you know, reading, it begins with an H. Damn it, it'll come back. So going back and reading the oldest extant texts that I could find on any given subject, and just kind of reading the myths over and over, and just sort of letting the pieces fall together.
Mhm.
Um, in terms of picking stuff out, Demeter seems fairly obvious. Bellerophon seemed fairly obvious. Um, and and then some of them were I mean, Pandora was definitely one of the ones that I was struggling with meaning, and it just really, I was just writing and it dropped onto the page. Um, so I wasn't even sure. My original thought was to have 6 stories, and I was writing, I was working on it, and I thought, oh no, it's only going to be 5 because I didn't have the 6th story. And right, like within a couple of months of when I had set the goal to publish this, the last one dropped in. So in terms of picking
Oh
them,
wow,
yeah,
that's
yeah.
late in the game.
I didn't know that was going to happen, but it's like, oh, okay, fine. Again, I just do what they tell me. Uh, yeah, in terms of picking them, it's very much and I'm still doing this. I'm still reading mythology, and not just Greek mythology. Now I've moved into Norse and
Mhm.
Celtic, and I plan to do some things with those as well. And I could see maybe writing something later on this. I One of the things about stories and how we tell them is that they evolve over time, and
Yeah.
which is why I didn't feel any guilt about rewriting these things. I mean, shit, Shakespeare did it. It can't be that bad. Um, so,
Yeah. And
um,
Shakespeare's revered. If
yeah,
there's any human being and in British culture that's near to divine status, it is Shakespeare.
indeed, yeah, and he was prepared to hijack his stories from everywhere, and he did take some stuff from Ovid. So, I didn't feel any concern or, you know, like, oh no, I've touched something sacred, because we don't have a sacred book. We can change our
Hmm.
stories, we can create something. And kind of going back to the slavery thing for a minute, um, the Celtic and the Norse cultures had slavery,
Yes,
but
they did.
if they had continued to, evolve, if they hadn't been hijacked, what would have happened to those cultures? Would they not maybe have continued to evolve? And would not, if these ideas are good, would they not have then manifested in the stories of the culture? So that's kind of what I'm looking at with what I'm
Hmm.
doing. And I want to create stories that pagans can look at. And it's like, they're stories. We don't have to look at them and say they're literally true, but myths were never supposed to be thought of as literally true,
Hmm.
or even as, a sacred piece of literature that no one
Yeah,
gets to eat. So,
or that there's only one accepted interpretation, and those who
right,
don't fall in line, get castigated.
right,
Some
right.
of our testy brethren, I'm looking at you. I've yelled at you before. This is exactly the kind of stuff we're talking about. And in my own interactions, especially with Loki, with whom I've worked more closely than I have with any other deity, when I was struggling with things in the Norse lore, that it's just like I don't see it. It was always the same message from him. You're being way too literal. What did you learn from this? Stop
Mm-hmm.
being so literal. You're missing the point.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the real danger that I feel like we're missing right now in modern paganism. Is just it's too many people missing the point of the story. They're so busy memorizing details and doing academic research that they miss the point and the heart of it.
Yeah. Yeah. And that was, but that's how we were brought up. That's what our education
Hmm.
system handed to us, was that,
Hmm.
these foolish ancient people were taking these stories literally, that they thought that, Demeter and Persephone were people that just walked the earth. That it's like, okay. And I thought that I didn't want to believe it. That was the thing, is I didn't want to believe that these people were that dumb, and that they I didn't want to believe that they believed that. But that's the story that I was certainly raised with. And taking it differently, is it's not necessarily an instinct for us, just because of the
Yeah.
world we live in. And we live in a very technical world. And so things really often are, it's like, no, point A to point B, which in a lot of ways that doesn't even apply anymore either.
Oh
Um,
no, especially these days. I mean, we have to find, okay, what's actually fact? Oh, I thought that was, but maybe not.
mm,
Maybe it wasn't. Where do I go from here?
yeah.
Well, and one thing that I have found helpful with interpreting the myths is that I'll ask myself, why are various deities there?
Mm,
And they're there and they're in the story and they're serving this function because there's something about their personality, their powers, the role
mhm,
they play in the
yep,
greater universe that's relevant to the topic. So it's less
yeah.
about this is the personal history of them, and it's more so of this is what you need to come to understand about them. This
Mhm,
is something
yes.
that's reflected in the nature of things, and it has physical implications and
Yeah.
all of that. And I do think that we can move that direction, as pagan peoples. And I think your work is part of the effort to shift that into a more helpful direction. Um, One thing I noticed is that Hannah's mother has a very, very loud, I'll put it that way, presence in the book. What led you to the decision to highlight that dynamic between the two? Because I felt like she was always there. Even if she wasn't on the page, the mother
Mhm.
was always there.
I think that we have distorted what it means to be a mother in
Hmm.
in the last, I don't know, it's probably, I don't know, it may go back to my childhood. Um, and in some ways we may not even know what that means anymore. Um,
Yeah.
Certainly, our world is very different from the world of our ancestors. Um, but there is a lot right now of overbearing mothering. And
Hmm.
mothering is, you're supposed to care for an infant very intensely for the first 6 to 8 months. Everything that baby needs should be attended to. After that point, there needs to start being separation, or you're going to end up with an unhealthy psychological adult human. Part of
Hmm.
our job as parents is to try and teach, is to prepare our little tiny human to be an adult human. And that means they need to be able to make their own decisions. They need to be able to interact with other human beings such in a way that the other human beings like them, because that's how we get into opportunities in life, is people say, oh hey, I really like what you're about and I like your attitude, so please come and work with me. We can do this
Hmm.
cool thing together, you can help. And if people don't like you, if you don't prepare your children to be likable and competent,
Hmm.
then they're not going to do well in the world. And that is currently evidenced by the multiple corporations who are having a hell of a time with recent hirings, and that
Hmm.
colleges don't seem to be preparing or parents aren't preparing, and they just hand the kids off to the colleges, and colleges aren't really doing much either, and you end up with a demographic of people who are struggling, trying to feel like they're competent in a world that is, life's complex. This is what it is. And I know that feeling, because when I came into the world, all I knew how to do was be a student. I'm like very comfortable being a student, but my mother didn't teach me anything. And I'm going to be
Mhm.
60 this year, at the end of the year, like, technically Gen X. But, you know, my mother didn't teach me how to do anything. I didn't know how to cook. I didn't know how to clean. I learned how to clean from my friend who did it professionally. I didn't, and this is just basic self-care, taking care of your
Yeah.
body, taking care of your environment. I was good at exercise. I was good at that. But I didn't know anything about money. All I knew was how to be a student. I'm still really good at that. But as an adult, I've had to learn all of these different skills. If you have a mother that is not giving the right amount of, guidance, and if they're glomming on and not letting a child make decisions, I saw an example of that the other weekend. It's like the kids, there was a bunch of kids playing. I was at a pagan gathering in Connecticut, and it's like there's this crew of kids, and they're playing, they're jumping on something. They had a little missile thing that was flying up in the air, and they're running and jumping on it, and they're taking turns, they're playing very
Mhm.
nicely. And then a mother came by with her kid and immediately inserted herself into that activity and started telling them how to do it. They had been
Oh.
doing it just fine for the last, 45 minutes without any guidance whatsoever. And I was just going,
I'm
so
amazed you still have a tongue from biting it.
yeah, yeah. And so, there's no guidance, which is what I got. And then there's way too much, there's way too much focus. And so, yeah, so I thought it was useful to put Hannah's mother in there, and to kind of model what not to do. And maybe I like to think that at the end of the book that she was able to have a little growth too.
Yeah, I did notice that she was able to come to peace, and it had me reflecting on, gosh, my experiences with my mother, who is a Virgo. So some aspect of the overbearing, they can't help. That's baked into the cake. It's just a question of management and people being aware that that's who they're dealing with and making decisions accordingly. But when I was young and had no life experience, I could never have seen it in that context. And it's I think the wonderful thing about your story is that you are essentially providing people that context so that when they're ready to grow into it, that's a lesson they'll be ready to hear. And your whole story grapples with huge meaning of life kind of questions. And it's not just a matter of, what can you do? Because I feel like in a lot of stories, it's what can this character do? What can take place? But you're instead taking the tactic of what's of meaning and value and why. And that's a way more difficult task than most authors actually subject themselves to. So, why did you decide to take up the challenge, or was that even your decision? Because we've talked about, you getting those little divine nudges to move in a particular direction.
Um, Definitely the divine nudges. But also, I know I'm looking at my own life, and I raised my stepdaughter, which was she's mentally ill. And so that experience was unsatisfying and challenging. Um, and I waited too long to think about having children. And I think I wasn't sure that I wanted to have children.
Mhm.
Children is one of the things that actually does provide meaning in people's lives, just as a
Yeah.
general rule. And when I was young, there was a certain amount of contempt around that idea, that
Yeah.
You know, it's like, oh, you're getting meaning from your children. Like that was some kind of awful thing. And
Mm-hmm.
as an adult who did not have children of her own, I'm looking at that going, okay, that was not the correct attitude. And
Yeah.
that was the attitude that I was schooled in as a young woman. That I was supposed to find meaning in my job and my employment. So questions of meaning are important to me because
Mm-hmm.
now, since I do not have children, I need to look at my life and say, what did I do here? And
Yeah.
and if there's, you know, writing is something that I'm good at. And if I can share some aspect of my life experience, and all writing comes from inside, you cannot
Mm-hmm.
write those emotions if you haven't dredged them out of your soul. That's that's how good writing works, is you dig into that deep place, and if it's not there, then it isn't deep enough. And
Yeah.
for some writing, that's fine. For me, I so many of the books I read, you know, changed who I was, or let me look at something in a way that I would never have had access to otherwise. So if I can create even a little bit of that for my readers to give, allow them to find meaning and discover what that is in their lives, because you know, when I was young, I didn't know that when you get closer to the end of your life, that meaning is critical. And
Mm-hmm.
it's like you don't want to get to the end of your life and go, what the hells did I do here? You know,
Yeah. Did I just take up space? I
right?
mean, nobody wants to be
Right.
in that headspace, and I'm so glad you were open and brought this up because a lot of women, a lot, are in this very situation. And it's because, what we were taught, what we were propagandized. Other people, they were more open to it, but because of poor relationship choices, it didn't happen. Or sometimes physically, there's infertility issues that Mother Nature wasn't going to let it happen. And
Right.
so having to strive for that kind of meaning, I think that's really going to be resonating, especially in the next 20, 30 years. It's going to
Yes.
be a very scary time. And I mean, ultimately, I do think this will help swing the other pendulum back, but I mean, getting those for whom it's too late to make different choices and still
Mhm.
find there's value, there's life, there's wisdom you can still share. I think that's going to be critical because we don't need more mental health crises in our society right now. We just
No, we
don't.
don't. Um,
One thing, oh, go on, go on.
um, I just want to, I can't remember again, no brain. Um, there was something I was reading recently, and this particular author, oh, it was Louise Perry. She was talking about the role of older women in
Mhm.
society, and that is women my age who are, you know, doing the volunteering and just quietly creating the spaces that allow people to function. Like, I just had a really nice conversation with a millennial mom, and you know, she just moved to Connecticut, and she put together a branch of Spiral Scouts, and I volunteered to go help her out with that. So it's like the some of the things that older women can do is to go and create those spaces that
Mhm.
support, you know, that support humans into the future. So that's something that is meaningful, that my generation and, you know, women who are coming into this space and for whatever the reason are looking for meaning in their lives, that that's something that you can do. You know, go volunteer, you know, read at the library, you know, go to the library, read a book to kids, shelf books, do something that helps support an institution that you like, or start to create an institution that you think will be of value going into the future, that will help humans in the future.
Yeah. And it always comes back to people, the nurturing of people. I mean, that's something that as women, we can't escape from it. We can't excise that from our natures, not in the slightest degree. I mean, people of how many generations have we watched who tried, and
It's
it's
a
it's
bad
a
idea.
catastrophe. I
Yeah.
mean, the ratio of crazy would not be so high if we were not being, pushed into this denial of ourselves. It's very cruel what's been done. It's very, very cruel.
I mean, don't get
So,
me wrong. I think
yeah.
it's important that we have the vote and that we be able to own property and all that kind of thing.
Hmm. Oh,
That's
yeah, absolutely.
important.
We do need that.
Yeah, we do need that. But you know, and I wouldn't want to be a woman in Athens, because basically a woman in Athens, unless you were a whore, you were
Mhm.
living in your house all the time, except when you got to go out and worship Dionysus in the woods. You know,
Yeah,
and thank gods for being able to get out and worship Dionysus in the woods, because you got to let off some steam at some point. And by the way,
yeah.
those were not orgies; those were women only rituals. So this is more of my research I've been doing. So yay! But that was what you had as a woman, and it's like, do I want to live in that culture? No, I don't. But but I also, it's like, how do I be a woman in this state,
Hmm.
in this time? So that's
Well, and it's also a question of, it's not about recreating the past in every aspect. It's about, here's a good idea. Can we still use that? I mean, that's really, at least that's what it's about for me.
yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
So kind of related to this vein, in the narrative, I noticed that you brought up the idea that sometimes people just have too many options, and that too many options kind of is a form of paralysis, and it leads to a state of arrested development. And that reminded me of two things. The first was that this is a state of being that is readily observable in society. I don't have to point out a specific example because 50 probably popped into every listener's heads right now. And the second thing it reminded me of is the way some of our brothers and sisters in the pagan world, they are seem like they're trying to remain in the state of which all options are available, kind of like the Fool card in the tarot, which for
Mm.
me represents the primordial well of all creative energies. But those energies cannot produce anything until the Fool goes on his journey, and that requires choices and the reduction of options. Did you have a theme like that in your mind while you were writing, or did you come at it from a different perspective?
Oh no, that was definitely there. I Somewhere on these bookshelves is a book about choice paralysis, and again, I'm going back to my own childhood when the story is, you're a woman, you can do anything. Yeah, well, I wasn't going to be a ballet dancer. I'm 5 feet. I'm 5'2". So, and my bones are way too heavy for that. So yeah, no ballet dancing for me. But the idea that I could do anything really, it really stuck me. Um, and it meant that for a long time I did not make a specific choice, and I didn't. Sometimes you just got to make the choice and dive in,
Hmm.
and
Yeah.
that's pretty much what I did with my marriage. And Ronnie and I've been married for, yeah, we were having our, let's see, actually I think it's, let's see, what's the date today. This is the Tomorrow's the 31st, so Sunday is actually our 22nd wedding anniversary.
Oh,
And
well, happy early anniversary.
thank you.
That's very good.
Yeah, and considering my mother got divorced when I was 7 and dad was checked out
Hmm.
long before then, I'm pretty proud of myself.
Oh
But
yeah, 22 years. That's nothing to sneeze at.
yeah, and that was through raising his daughter, who was very
Mhm.
troubled. And it was like, no, make the damn commitment and just do it, even if it's really hard, because that's where the meaning comes from.
Mhm.
So when you have so many choices, the tendency is to not make one. Um, it's better to just dive in and do something, even if it's the wrong thing. It's just make a commitment, do it, because you know what? Fine, you switch gears or you find meaning in what you did, even if it's hard.
And it's better than treading water. I mean, people, I don't think they really take into account how exhausting that is, and to be in that
Yeah, yeah,
state,
that's right.
in life and psychologically, spiritually. I mean,
Yeah,
if there, what would hell be if not that?
yeah. And I didn't really think about that exhaustion. But yeah, I think you're absolutely right about that. That's like it, yeah, it was exhausting. It was exhausting. And yeah, I think you put your finger right on it. Um,
I'm not fired yet, then I guess. So I'm trying desperately to avoid spoilers. So I want to be very careful in this observation. But it seemed to me that the cost of admission for Hannah along every single stage of her journey was increased understanding. Until she had the understanding, she could not move forward at every single level. And I found that very relatable on both a personal and spiritual level. So are you hoping your readers are going to take that as inspiration to actually look within themselves? So they can say, okay, what have I been avoiding? What do I need to come to understand so that they can actually get to the next stage of their journeys?
of course, I got nothing to add to that. That's and that's some writers are just aiming to get um, something fun out there. There's not a damn thing wrong with that because we all need a little escapism once in a while. Um, I can't do that. No,
Yeah.
no, and it's again, we're back to meaning. If people can look at their own stuff, then you know what to get. Most, a lot of the ancient Greek myths were just about, you couldn't avoid your fate. Fate was fate.
Yeah.
However, there were stupid things that you could avoid. And a lot of the Greek myths are about don't do this stupid thing. So, you know, if I can help people not do the stupid thing I did, that's a win.
Yeah, you actually touched on the very thing I was going to ask you about now, because all of the Greek myths, it's always about there are consequences for your attitudes, and through your attitudes come actions, and then the actions, then there are more consequences. That's always stressed 1000% of the time,
Yeah.
from I'm looking at people, and I think they're desperately trying to avoid consequences of every variety in their
Mhm.
lives. I think that's pretty so self-evident. I don't think I really need to ask you if you've observed the same. I'm sure you have.
Mhm.
But what about the impact? What is the consequence of them avoiding their consequences in your view?
Oh, it's always worse. I look at, and again, I'm going to come back to my own life. I raised a stepdaughter who is, and she's very, very troubled. However, if I hadn't intervened, if I hadn't taken on that responsibility, how much worse would it have been? You know,
Yeah,
would there have been blood on the floor? Her mother was struggling with her, and it was not going to be a good scenario. So even if things don't go the way you want, if you try, that matters. That does
hmm
make the world a better place because the world is, by definition, always falling apart. How much
yeah,
worse can it be? How much worse would it be if you don't step in and do something? You know,
yeah.
maybe it's not going to be perfect, but it's going to be better than it was. It can always be worse. Things can always be worse. We know that.
Yeah.
You know.
Well, and what I see over and over again, and especially in some of the current political tediousness, is that there are people who are allowing the perfect to become the enemy of the good.
Mhm.
And I find it so frustrating. Like, if we're making progress in a more healthy direction, in what way is that not worthwhile?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And then of course we have to agree on what that healthy direction is. But
That's true. Then that is challenging these days. Because again, I think people are trying to avoid consequences again because they don't want to see certain behaviors that's leading to certain undesirable outcomes consistently. Because if it did, then first they're wrong, and everyone is always so thrilled to admit when they personally have been wrong. And then it's the whole their whole world philosophy starts coming unraveled. The same thing happens when people go on spiritual journeys. They started poking around at some fundamental questions. They discovered their religion didn't have very good answers, and that things were not as straightforward as they were, and then it just sends them into this whole existential crisis. um, I don't know if you have thoughts about what we might do about that, but as we are talking about, the meaning of life things, I thought I'd give you a chance to kind of put in your 2 cents at least.
um, I think when we look at our stuff. And I think the biggest thing we can do is just take responsibility for what we can take responsibility for. I mean, it does go back to the Greeks. There's stuff that's going to happen, and some of it's good. Some of that stuff is good, and I think if we look around, we can see in our own lives the things that are good and be grateful for that. And gratitude is right next to humility, because it says, I didn't control that. I didn't. The cool thing happened. Thank you. That's gratitude is an automatic thank you. And taking responsibility for what we can is, and even it doesn't have to be everything at once. Yeah, I mean, there's the big dark shadow out there. It's like, oh my God, my parent did this, and this. And, it's not that they don't do this, and this, because, people are messed up. But if we step back and it's like, all right, take responsibility for this one little thing. I don't have to embrace the entire shadow all at once. It's not necessary. You can take a little piece, all right. So I am really bad at whatever the hell it is. It's like, oh, I'm really bad at opening my mail. So today I'm going to open 2 pieces of my mail. Okay, awesome. I'm taking responsibility for those 2 little pieces of mail today, whatever they are. As you start to do that, it becomes easier to start looking at the shadow and walking into it and saying, wait a minute, you don't control me. I have control here. This is like, and it's just building habits. So,
it's interesting how people handle control also seems to be reflected in and sometimes their perceptions of meaning, because I've noticed kind of 2 extremes that are going on right now. Is that there are people who reject the idea that anything has meaning ever, or that anything has impact, or that it should touch you on any kind of deeper level, and that's if they acknowledge that there's even a deeper level to touch. It's quite disheartening to encounter such people, so I tend to avoid them, but they exist. They absolutely exist. And then on the flip side, there are people who they'll acknowledge meaning, but they want to control what that meaning is, or they're trying to assign meaning to things where that's not actually what it was at all. You are jumping at the shadows. What do you think is going to be necessary to restore balance, and hopefully through balance, sanity, at least an acceptable level of it?
I think we all need to slow down a little bit. And I'm not, in any sense of the word, anti-industrial revolution technology. I'm not a Luddite. I do not think we should go back to being hunter-gatherers. Not only that would be there's just so much fatality there. That is not a good vision. However, a little slowing down, a little putting on the brakes, spending time talking to other human beings, which is what that's actually my recent goal, is like, how many women, and I'm focusing specifically on women, how many women can I sit down and chat with in the course of a week? I'm an introvert. This is a challenge. But
it's hard.
But it's still, this is how we rebuild. I think our web has been torn. Our web has been so torn by, honestly, in some ways by the internet, but also by the idea that we can't talk to each other. And really, it goes back to, certainly when I was a kid, and I'm sure it goes back to, like, my mother's generation. It's like, oh, we don't talk about politics and religion. Yeah, we damn well need to talk about politics and religion. We have to, because these are the things that are fundamental. Religion is how we see the world. It's how we connect to the divine, because that's, again, this is how you're getting back to meaning. Why are we here? We need answers to these questions. And, politics is how we negotiate that in the real world. If we can't talk to each other, well, here we are. So
we're looking at it.
Yeah, isn't this fun? We're having fun, right? When does it start? When does the fun start? Um, so and it's bad for both sides of the political spectrum, because both sides of the political spectrum are scared. On one
Yeah,
side, they're
desperately
scared
so.
this thing's going to happen, and on the other side, they're scared of this thing. And I'm not saying, I have my opinions about it, again, who I'm going to vote for.
Hmm.
However, there's a lot of fear, and the only way we get rid of fear is by doing what humans are supposed to do, which is talk to each other. How do we do that? Well, we got to listen first. And
Yeah.
so my approach, this is what I'm doing. This is my real world. This is what I'm trying to do to change the world, besides the writing, of course,
Hmm.
is talking to people, and not me talking, but like asking questions like, okay, how did you come to that opinion? Um, what are you concerned about? Where does your, and if I can get deep enough, then asking, okay, what about this situation scares you? Because people don't always want to talk about emotions right off the top. And
Yeah.
what are your concerns? And really listening deeply to that, because sometimes there's an answer that can be offered that can ease someone's fear. And I'm going to give you an example. I have a friend that I've reconnected with, and she lives in California, and she's been determined to talk about politics, which I'm very impressed with. And so we've we've set up some rules around it. It's like, all right,
Hmm.
I kind of I don't have as much. I don't think I have as much emotional charge, so I'm kind of letting her lead it. But we've talked about it. It's like we can set a boundary around this. All right, we're going to talk about this for 20 minutes, and then we're going to talk about something else. Keeps the emotion
Hmm.
level from getting too freaked out. And pretty much, at this point, she's picking the subject she wants to talk about. But at some point, I'm going to say, well, I'd like to talk about whatever. Um, but it's the elephant in the room. And if we don't talk about it, that's going to impact our friendship. So we have to talk about it. There's no
Yeah.
getting away from this. Otherwise, it's too big. This stuff is too big now. So, we're taking the time, and we're like saying, okay, we pick a subject. Like she asked who I was going to, she asked who I was going to vote for. But back to my, what are you afraid of thing. So we were talking about the environment, and she's very worried about environmental degradation, as am I think this is a big
Hmm.
concern. This remains a concern. This has been a concern for me. So it's like, what we do about it, that's a different conversation. However, I introduced her to something called permaculture, which is a way of producing food in conjunction with nature. You're working with
Hmm.
nature instead of against it. It's really effective. And the reality is that industrial farming has never actually produced more food per acre than small mixed farms do. There's really good reasons, political reasons, why industrial farming is preferable to a government,
And I
because
imagine those reasons too.
also it's control, because you're controlling a
Hmm.
single chunk of the food source, but it also means that you're keeping track of things. You can't tax stuff when you can't keep track of it. Small farmers
That's
are
true.
probably the most independent people in the world. And we all talk as pagans, we often say, oh, we want to support the earth, we want to support small farms. And that's a very common thing I hear. I don't know
Hmm.
how often it actually happens. So, you know, but in terms of communication, finding something, and she loved that idea. She was excited about that idea. It made her heart bigger. And so, what I want to do is find what answers to things that make people afraid, and say, here's a different way of looking at that. Here's a different solution. Those solutions are out there. They're there. The gods have, they're just sitting there. We just need to look at them. So we got to find them and share them with the people who are worried about whatever, share a little dose of reality, just a tiny one, and just let it sit, because it takes time for people to absorb things, and then maybe
Yeah.
come back and do a little bit more. And so that's what I'm doing right now. That is my how to make the world better project in process, among other things.
Planting seeds. I love that you put it in those agricultural and gardening terms because, for one, we can understand the concept and we know that, you don't, put the little seed in today and then you harvest the fruit tomorrow,
Oh no.
which I think also helps teach patience. And that's one of the things that I really appreciate every year as I go through that Wheel of the Year cycle. It's just because it reminds me of that all things have their time to take place. And, just how foundationally important it is if you have the privilege to be amongst the people planting the seeds. I think we are really underestimating the value of what current pagan work is really accomplishing. Um, but a couple more things I want to get to before we let everybody go. I want to address the question of people achieving what they want, or at least what they think they want, because I'm starting to see in a few other avenues of storytelling, and I saw it in your book as well, that perhaps our wants are not exactly the most reliable guide we could have, which is very alarming for our culture, which is so goal oriented and so want oriented. And in fact, a recent series that I watched, The Umbrella Academy, one of the titles of their episodes is the unbearable agony of getting what you want. So, do you think it's possibly bad for us? I mean, what do you have to say on that?
Yeah, we don't always know what we want. And you were talking earlier about the too much choice, but you know, especially as a woman who was raised with a very poor example of what masculinity is and had to like sort that out later. Um,
Yeah.
Sometimes we want things that aren't good for us. And
Hmm.
I think that, and I think that's my, and this is, we're going to go into magic a little bit here because one of the things that happens when you do spells is you're shifting the universe to, bring you whatever it is you think you want. And all of the medieval grimoires about magic, every single
Hmm.
one of them said, you need to study philosophy and look inside yourself before you do any magic because shit's going to hit the
Hmm.
fan otherwise. And
Yeah.
I was just reading something the other day about it was some monk who was studying, he was studying a particular grimoire and he, gave it to his little sister because she wanted it and bad things happened.
Oh dear.
Yeah. So,
Oh dear.
yeah. So until we've studied ourselves internally a little bit more, we should be very careful about saying, I have this as a goal. Yes, do something, commit to something, by all means. And again, it's still better to commit to something than it is to not commit to something. Um,
Yeah.
but you know, be aware that sometimes what you think you want isn't really great as you think it is. So, and this is where community and communication comes in because if you have a girlfriend that thinks that guy is a bad person, use your imagination with the word language I just used, thought
Hmm.
about. So if you have a girlfriend or three that think this guy is bad news, even if he's really attractive, maybe think about that. And it's something to consider. My mother married a guy. She had no family connection, and she was in Pennsylvania, and her family was up in Maine. And when she brought him home, the entire family hated him.
Ooh,
Yeah,
that's usually a really bad sign.
and
I
it
mean,
was
and there's exceptions, of course, but I mean, on the whole, that should
yeah.
at least give a
So
person
I mean, you
pause.
don't have to just ask your family. We all have family of choice. Talk to them,
Hmm.
see what they think, and not everybody's going to give you an honest answer too. But try and get an aggregate.
Yeah, that's
If you're
true.
not sure, talk to other human beings. Get feedback. That's what we're supposed to be doing with each other. We're supposed to
Well,
be connecting. We are tribal creatures.
and to take your example a little bit further, sometimes, that energy of the guy who's really bad news, he has a very seductive kind of energy because, you feel like, oh, I'm being bad, or oh, this is exploration, or whatever else, whatever the thing is, but it's like a predator laying a trap for prey. And
Yes.
And when you're in the thick of it, you don't always recognize it. And I think that's also an aspect of the whole how our wants aren't the only thing to take into consideration.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So, is there anything else that I haven't touched on that you would really like to tempt? We just talked about temptation, but this is good temptation. But you would like to tempt the potential readers with for the storytellers? Anything to draw them in?
Um. Oh dear, you've put me in a terrible spot.
I'm good at that. People usually forgive me.
um. This has been, the story is. It was a passion for me, and I was really honored to be a channel for it. And I just hope you read it. So it's my offering to my fellow pagans. Paganism has been a haven for me, and because, sorry, Christians, it didn't work for me. It didn't work,
Yeah.
and I would like this is I like to think this is something that I'm giving back a little bit, and if I can help a little bit, then that's that makes it worth it to me. So
Awesome. Now, I know you're a busy lady, so is it possible we could get any kind of hint about your future projects?
I my next nonfiction book is going to be called The Case for Paganism, and if you're watchers, I'm writer, so readers, if your watchers would be kind enough to bless me with, I have a survey that I'm asking people to fill out. I even have an academic. I have a professor who's actually helping me with this and help me set up the questions. The book is called The Case for Paganism. The idea is that I wanted pagans to have something that they could hand to their Christian or maybe Jewish families to say, this is why this matters to me, and to articulate some of the theology and some of the very core reasons why this is Pixel, why paganism, it matters and is important and works for us. And so I have this great little survey. It does not take very long, and I think Brigantia is going to link it in the comments. And
Yeah, I have it pinned on Rumble already, and I'll have it pinned on the YouTube side after we're done.
thank you very much. I've got
Oh, my pleasure. My pleasure.
I've got
I have
almost
taken the survey, by the way.
She did. She did. And it's completely anonymous. I'm not collecting names or emails or anything like that. Yeah. So that's the next nonfiction. The next fiction project is I have two more novels that are. I have two more novels in my Sorceress series that are first draft. Actually, one's first draft, one's second draft. So I need to finish those up and get them in print. And I'm working on I write in a world that I'm calling God's Rule, and it's where the gods still communicate directly with humans, like in a more obvious way than they do for us. I mean, because for us,
Yeah.
they're and just like our cats. Um, and so I'm working on that. So I'm working on that, and there's magic, and there's centaurs, and there's satyrs, and I'm working on my most recent project is um, in a slightly different part of the world. So I'm dealing with different gods, and so that's going to be a lot of fun. And I'm working with the Celtic and Norse gods for that one. And
A lot
so
of
I,
fun.
yeah, I'm having a lot of fun with it, because in this one I've got all of this. It's like building a whole new world, honestly, because I've got this whole corpus of backstory for everybody in the Greek part of the culture, and then going into the Norse and Celtic is like, oh, I gotta rebuild everything. Okay, all right, here we go. so, so
Oh, it's always a labor of love.
it is.
So where can people find you, and where can they find more of your work? I do have links below, but there could be things that I have not mentioned or forgot to put down. So let the
Okay.
people know.
I am at, let's see if I can remember the name of my blog. I have a blog on Substack. You can just search for 21st Century Pagan. So it's probably the best place to find me. That is my blog by a pagan for pagans. I have another blog that I write that is by a pagan for non-pagans, and that is just Selina Rifkin .substack.com. So you can do either, 21st. You can look for 21st Century Pagan. You can just look for my name, and I write under Cauldron, under the pagan writing as writing to non-pagans. So I've got two blogs. Brigantia's got my book links, so there's plenty to read there. So, and I also train my cats. That's, as she mentioned, I have a cat. I'm just starting a cat training blog because I need money. So.
Hey, it's a good thing. All righty. I think that about covers it. We went into a lot of things pretty in depth. I'm so happy you agreed to come on here and talk about your latest, and I hope you will make future appearances. Um, Thank you to everyone who popped in. I know this is the middle of the working day, so not everyone was able to come here. So if you're watching on this replay, thank you for that as well. For those who were only here part of the time, but probably got distracted by this tedious thing called the day job. Thank you very much for actually taking the time, and hope you will come and see us soon. And yeah, I think that is it. I'm rambling. I apparently need more tea myself today, so we will end it there. Bye to the viewers.
Thank you.